Welcome, everyone. I'm certainly hoping that all of you, got a chance to look at some of the material that Deanna sent out as part of this meeting request. I am going to go through some of it with you, but what we're hoping is to try and our purpose for this call really is to get the groundwater allocation document kind of nailed down so that we can take it to the board in January. So let me give you a few quick updates from our agenda. And Deanna, if you want to add anything, please let me know. But on the Tule subbasin, the big item right now is the Proposition 68 grant that is due on January 8th. There is one grant application per subbasin. The Tri-County project that we are submitting is the White River basins and stormwater capture, what we're calling the Allensworth project now, because one of the big items that they look for in this particular grant application is the benefits to underrepresented communities. So Deanna and I kind of looked at a project in Allensworth. This is on property owned by the Angela Water District. Angela, about 4 or 5 years ago, had some plans to build some reservoirs. They've done some preliminary plans, but we took a look at that project, had some very good discussions with the folks over at Allensworth. And we think based on that, we can write what we've done is write up a new project description that incorporates the groundwater recharge basins along with a recreational area for Allensworth. So we help Allensworth with their flood problems. We capture White River floodwater, recharge it and store that and make that available to the GSA. And then in the dry years, through a different funding mechanism, Allensworth will be able to use a portion of that basin for recreational purposes as well. We're also going to tie it into their trail system. We're going to help do some beautification along the park there or the basin, I should say, to mitigate some of the impact from the high-speed rail for them. So we are pretty excited. We think this is a really, really good, strong project. I think the important part for you guys is that this would be a project that we could capture some stormwater and make available to the southeast area. The project itself, there's not enough money to do everything in one phase, so we've kind of broken it up into 3 phases. The first phase is to get the basins built. The second phase, through separate funding, is to build the recreational. And then the third phase, which we would pursue through round 2 of the Prop 68, is to do some expansion of the canal system that's out there to be able to get water into the basins and then get that water out to the, probably the Alpine main canal and bring it down south into the southeast area. So we are working on, round 1 right now with the Prop 68. We've got a meeting with the Tule subbasin here at 1 o'clock this afternoon. It is a competitive bid. There's about $26 million, I believe, available for all of basins. And then round 2, which is going out for, or which will be available starting in 22, is about $74 million. So there's a lot of money available, and we're looking at ways to try and come up with projects that are going to help us, bring water and make water available for Tri-County. What I would encourage all of you, and this is really important, I think, is that in April of next year, we have the annual report for Tulare Lake and Tule Subbasin. For those two annual reports are going in April. They're to DWR. If you have projects that you are thinking about, and they can be conceptual projects, let's make sure that we identify those projects in that document. And this is important, I think, because one of the funding requirements for this Prop 68 is that the project has to be identified in the GSP. And right now, there's some very limited number of projects that are identified in the Tri-County GSP. So this is a little bit of a stretch, and I certainly will admit that. But if we can identify some of those projects, upcoming projects in the annual report, we can tell DWR that, hey, the annual report is our submittal and updates and everything else as part of the GSP. So if you have some projects that you think would be something that you would like to consider for round 2, and round 2 is going to be due in January of 22, please get that information to Deanna, and we'll make sure it gets into the annual report. And even if, like I said, even if it's a conceptual, or if you have more ideas, or however you want to, if it's just a couple paragraphs, let me know and we can get it into that document.
Say, Amir?
Yeah.
Jeff here, yeah. I don't know whether you were gonna bring it up or whether it's even relevant, but the Temperance Flat, I think it's a JPA. It's formally would notify the California Water Commission that they're declining and returning the money that was allocated to them on Prop 1. But they're urging the Water Commission to reprogram that money to storage projects in the valley. And from what I understand, it's a very short timeline because Prop 1 is well underway. But I don't know whether that's on everybody's radar screen in the valley about any of the potential storage projects that are in these GSPs that could be repackaged and reworked, kind of like you did with the Allensworth project, that to try to get them to fit within the Prop 1 stuff. But yeah, that was 170 million, I think, in that range, that's been turned back to the Water Commission with a big push from the Temperance Flat, all of the various parties that supported that money get reprogrammed to Valley projects.
Do you know if that actually happened? Do you know if there's?
Yeah, there's a staff report that's in the Friant board meeting package from last Friday's meeting. That's where I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to know. Amir, I had a question on the capacity. I know that I sent over the preliminary drawings that were done back in 2015. Did you estimate or take a look at the total capacity for those two reservoir areas?
Yeah, so the total capacity is huge. And obviously there's not enough money to build out the exactly, everything. It's about 1,100 acres that Angela owns out there. Obviously we're not going to build an 1,100 acre storage facility. So what we're really looking at, Dan, is probably closer to about 60 acres, which would be, oh, shoot. Now I lost, I don't have that sheet in front of me, but it's about a 60-acre facility. And I want to say it was, darn it, 1,100 acre feet, but I'll have to double check that for sure.
Okay. And that brings us to a couple things. A part of this project and part of what I'm looking at with it being between the Pixley and the Kern refuges is that when water is there, it creates a flyway and habitat, a purpose for habitat, a place. And so the downside of this current project is we still, if we could get conveyance even from Deer Creek over to that area, which again would be, you know, most likely through Alpa, but we could bring water into there even when it's not on high flow times. So we still will look at also shoring up the conveyance upstream on the White River Channel. That there's some issues there too, but you know, these are long-term projects, and we start working on them, and we'll make them better as we go. And then that also brings me to, I had a discussion with the Department of Water Resources, and it ties into what you were talking about, the annual report. So what was discussed was the annual report and comments and all the things that we've been talking about. Two interesting things came out of that. One, when they come back with the grade on our plans, and also when they are looking at the annual report, they are looking at proof of what we're implementing. They want to see what we're implementing, and they want the proof documented in the annual plans. So they didn't want the annual plans to be necessarily overwhelmed with just information other than documentation. They also said through the annual plan, anything you've done to address comments should also be documented. So, and you know, I asked the question, should we be addressing the comments specifically? And it was non-committal. It was, if they're important comments, they should be addressed, and it should show in the annual plan how you address them. So I think those are some things we have to work through still, but the annual plans, or the annual reports, the annual reports are going to become very important in how we inform those annual reports. The department's going to be looking at heavily. So anyway, that's what I have on the department.
Okay. All right, so that's the Prop 68. We are asking for about $2.5 million for our project, and that discussion with the rest of the subbasin is going to occur later this afternoon. So we'll have some more information on exactly what's going to be submitted. For some reason, if our project is not submitted in this round, it will, you know, we will be fighting very hard to make sure that it is, but if it's not, then we're going to look at submitting it in round 2 for sure as well. Okay. Tri-County updates, annual report, you know, Deanna.
Before you move on, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mo.
On that White River project, how much water are we really expecting from that project? I realize the basin is 1,100 acres, but you know, how frequently and how much water do we actually get from the White River?
Mark, you want to take that one, or do you know?
Well, it's going to flood on average 1 to 7 to 10 years, so you'll get water through there. Deer Creek's 1,000, so if you wanted to say 10%, probably average 100 acre feet a year. Over a 30-year average.
You know, the area doesn't flood often, but it has.
Yeah, when it floods,
when it does flood, it does flood. And the town of Allensworth in 2011, I believe, was that the flood year before 17? Flooded significantly. And so, again, I think it's about conveyance and preparing some of the, you know, if you look at tie this into the Valley Blueprint, they're looking at a turnout on White River. They're looking at turning out water to the east. But if we were prepared, maybe we can get turnout water to the west. So, you know, I think there's a lot of potential there, not only to create the flood control project to protect Allensworth in the event that it will flood, even if it's just, you know, periodically, but also to prepare to get some water into the southeast area through other avenues.
So then the follow-up question to that is, if the project is approved, the grant monies will cover the entire project, or are we as landowners going to have to put up some cash?
So
Depends on the size.
Well, there is a 25% match that we have to come up with. So that's roughly about $600,000 that Tri-County would be on the hook to match for this grant.
Okay.
So we want to make sure now, again, I want to stress that's all that money would be used on the basins. They are the recreational park and everything else that I mentioned for Allensworth. We're going to use separate money for that, completely separate from this grant. And that would just, so you're not on the hook for any of that, but we are, you know, the match. Now the match may be reduced, Mo, if DWR decides that the project, you know, agrees with us that it provides sufficient coverage for Allensworth and the flooding issue, then they may reduce our match all the way down to 0. Now, at 0, it has to be 100%, you know, to the benefit of Allensworth, which I think realistically our project probably is not, because it also benefits the rest of us. But it's likely that that 25% may be reduced. So that's our hope. That's one of the reasons, one of many reasons, but it's one of the reasons that we reached out to Allensworth was we thought we could also reduce some of our cost sharing that would be required as well.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? So we'll keep you guys updated on exactly how that submittal is coming along and what actually gets turned into the state. The annual report, just a reminder that we've got water level data due to the DWR by the end of this month. As you know, Sigma now, or the GSAs, I should say, are now required to update the Sigma portal twice a year. That's what DWR has requested, and Four Creeks is taking care of that. For the Thule site and the Tulare Lake site, we have already done that. There's only a couple monitoring locations on the Tulare Lake side. So that's been done. The annual report will be due in April, as I mentioned. And again, I would stress to everybody, if you have a project or if you think you have a conceptual project that you would like to include, please get us the information and we will make sure it gets included. We don't have to mention, you know, the ownership and all of that kind of stuff. Get us what you can, and we can work with you on what we can release into the annual report, or what we want to include in the annual report. The rules and regulations are still underway. We are, you know, continuing to work on those, and that'll be one of our focuses in coming into 2021. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about over the next few months with this group as well. Deanna, any updates on the watershed plan from Kathy, or is there anything she wanted to share with the group?
No, unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it on the call. She just said that they have not heard back yet regarding the watershed coordinator grant. So no update at this time.
Okay. And all right. In that case, let's jump into the meat of this meeting, which I'm hoping all of you got a chance to read the document that Deanna sent out on the groundwater allocation. I'm going to go through a brief slideshow that just kind of touches on some key items for anybody who hasn't had a chance yet to read that. I would encourage you, when you do get a chance, please read it, because you know, I'm going to hit some of the highlights, but I'm not going to be able to go into all of the nuances of the document. So we are absolutely looking to get everyone's input on this before it goes to the board next month. And I'm just waiting on Deanna to give me permission to share my screen.
I know, I'm trying to do, I don't remember where it's at right now. Oh my gosh.
I think, is it,
Can you not share? I hit the security. Allow participants to share screen. You should be able to.
yes, okay.
Great. It's in security.
I always get this wrong. Okay, so give me a second here and I'll start sharing. Okay, give me 1 second.
Now I can see your screen now.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
We can see it.
Oh, you can. Okay, perfect. All right. All right. All right. So let me give you a quick update on this. And like I said, all of you should have this. The document is part of the package. So I don't think there's going to be any big surprises today, but I want to hit some of the key items. 5 categories of water that we're talking about, and then we're going to go through each one of these individually, but sustainable yield, a landowner credit, a credit for specific and only applicable to Angiola, and we'll talk just a second about that. The overdraft transitional pumping, a tier 1, and an overdraft transitional pumping, a tier 2. So there's first one, so everyone who is 5 acres or properties that are 5 acres or more, I think I wrote this down. Did I get that wrong? Oh, yeah, all parcels 5 acres or larger will be eligible to receive groundwater sustainable yield allocation and landowner development credit. Actively irrigated lands based on Land IQ data from 2018 will then qualify for the transitional pumping. So a little bit different than what we had last time. We thought about trying to use the irrigated lands program.
I can expand on that a little bit. Okay. In working with 4 Creeks, we're working on setting up the data management system. And one of the benefits of them going through Eastern Thule's data management setup is the benefit of knowing what worked and didn't work. And Eastern Thule tried to use, I believe, the irrigated lands program. And what they found was many farmers don't really update that like they should. They kind of just check the box and resend it back in. So when they went back, they found that a much better look at what was actual actively irrigated land was to take a satellite look, and it drills right down. You can see everything from the home to the yard to what is actually growing there. So we will, if somebody looks at that, if a landowner looks at that and says, no, that is not correct, we'll work with our landowners as necessary. But that's how we came to this Land IQ 2018. It's not something pulled out of the sky. It's just what they see is working best right now for figuring out who is actively irrigating.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So, and sorry, I'm in the office by myself and all of a sudden the front door opened, so I was trying to figure out what was going on there. Sorry, got a little distracted. Okay, sustainable yield. So the value that we're using for sustainable yield essentially will be harmonized across the entire Tri-County area, meaning both Tule and Tulare Lake. So we'll have to work with both subbasins to come up with the final value every 5 years. As I said, it'll be adjusted every 5 years and it'll be allocated in 5-year blocks. Sustainable yield can be carried over from 5-year blocks to the next one. So if any one particular 5-year block you have not used up all of your sustainable yield, you will be allowed to carry that over. That value is not changed from the numbers right now that we're using, that we've reported on previously.
Which is,
Mayor, that's 0.44 acre feet per acre, correct?
Yes,
Point
yes.
44, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear that question. Yes, but yes, that's right. Now, the one thing that we're doing maybe a little bit differently in this one is the sustainable yield can be transferred within the Tri-County boundaries. And we are looking at ways to figure out, coordinating with everyone to allow you to transfer that within other GSAs within the Tule and Tulare Lake. But all of that needs some additional work and some additional approvals and coordination with the surrounding GSAs and subbasins. So there's still a little bit of work to be done, but immediately, certainly anything within Tri-County that you can transfer that sustainable yield number between different properties that might be owned in Tri-County.
And Mayor, I'm assuming that's over subbasin boundaries as well, or are you following the Tri-County different GSAs for each subbasin boundaries for transfers?
I'm sorry, Stacey, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I followed your question.
Technically, DWR required different GSAs for different subbasin boundaries. And so the Tri-County GSA actually has 2 different sets of boundaries, but I'm assuming this is for the whole of the GSA.
Yes, that
Correct.
is correct. Yeah, that is correct. Yes, absolutely, that's correct. Okay, so landowner developed credits. These would be credits that a individual landowner, based on projects and other things that they choose to do. We want to encourage these types of projects, and so we want to make sure that there is some type of credit assigned to them. So the first one obviously is any carryover. If you have not used all your sustainable yield in the first 5-year allotment, you can carry your sustainable yield over. You can, also get it credited when you transfer it to other lands as well. We want to be able to, if you have surface water deliveries that are going to be used to recharge groundwater, we want to make sure that there's credit for that recharge. We want to make sure that if there's, any types of credits between the different landowners from transfers, we want to make sure that those are credited. And then if you bring in water, for example, or transfer items from outside of Tri-County, we have all of those details worked out. We want to make sure that there's credits for those as well.
I've got a question.
The idea here is to encourage people to look at projects in ways to bring in water and to be able to give you, give you a mechanism to get some credits for that. I will say that on any banking or recharge projects, there will be a leave behind, and that leave behind value will then be credited to the GSA and distributed over the sustainable yield for the, for the GSA.
Mayor, is that leave behind established? I didn't see it in the documents.
It's not yet. We're still having that discussion on exactly what that percentage should be. We are trying to take a look at what some of the other GSAs in the area are doing in terms of leave behinds. And we're probably going to try and make sure that we are going to try and match that or at least consider that as we're coming up with a leave behind value. Deanna, did you want to add something?
No, I think, you know, the range is probably anywhere from 10 to 25%, and it may be specific to whether that's recharge or a water banking project that has yet to be developed. It's hard to make a hard and fast rule when you don't exactly have a project to tie it to yet. So, but the thought is in 2021, we're going to work very diligently to develop further what we're going to call the rules and regulations. And then of course that will end up with legal to go through. And at the end of 2021, we hope to pass all of this in an ordinance very similar to what Eastern Tule is doing. So we'll be working through that, and as always, we're open to anybody's thoughts on how that should look. But as the mayor said, it will be very similar to our neighbors. We're not going to take a 50% leave behind or anything,
Right,
you know,
right.
out of line with what others are doing. So, you know, we want to give as much credit to the landowners for anything they develop as possible.
Yeah. Any water that we can bring in, we want to encourage that, and we want to encourage, you know, your innovation. So, you know, that all needs to be taken into account. So a lot of this, the reason that number is not there, part of it is that should, this group is the one that should help us kind of decide and develop what that number should be. Obviously, you know, if I'm the one developing the project, I want that number to be as small as possible. But as a group, you know, as we're looking across the entire GSA, you know, we need to look at what that you know, what that leave behind should be in the benefit of everyone. So we look forward to a lot more discussions on how best to come up with some of these type of credits with this group. And we want to do, you know, if we need to expand this list to allow for other types of credits, then let's talk about that as well over the next year.
Hey, Amir, just one comment on the input. I fully understand why the consideration for, you know, what the neighbors are doing, but I would just encourage us to have our own conviction. And if data and science point to a number, I don't think just because Johnny did it, then Timmy needs to do it. We're big kids and we can come up with numbers. So
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
Yeah. You know, I totally agree, Carl. I mean, this is the group, you know, this committee that we have right now is the one that should help and give a recommendation back to the board, because ultimately the idea here is to encourage projects that bring in more water or save water or do something different than what we're doing today without, you know, without having to go to fallowing and things of that nature. We want to try and credit you and come up with some innovation. So I agree with you, Carl.
So Amir, I got a question.
Sure.
When does this period start for the landowner development credits? For example, our group brought in water from outside last year. So would we get credit for that?
So that's a good question, Mo. That's a very good question. The initial thought here was that we were going to start this in 21, and you'll see that you know, when we talk about the tier 1 allocation. But we're happy to have that conversation. We have to have a cutoff limit at some point. You know, I can't give you credit for something that was, you know, several years ago.
Mo, that water would have been used in lieu of pumping, correct?
It was used in lieu of pumping.
Right. So So the only credit for water that's brought in that's used in lieu for pumping, the only reason we'll set up a credit for that is if we are invoicing off of Land IQ, we've got to show that for the evapotranspiration numbers. Other than that, that's not really a credit because you're just, you're not pumping, you're using that water over there. It wouldn't be, what it would do is keep you from being charged those, that would not come out of your water block account. Does that make sense?
Okay, so then what is the landowner development credit then if it's not that?
It's either your sustainable yield that rolls over, or any type of recharge project, or possible credits that occur that aren't, we don't have the policy for yet, but maybe upstream credits, those type of things that would be developed. It would have to be a direct recharge or water banking, something that actually goes back into the ground that causes that credit, and or sustainable yield rollover.
Okay. So since we brought in surface water from the outside and we used it in lieu of pumping, it would in essence be a sustainable yield rollover, right?
If you brought water and it's used in lieu of pumping, those numbers would go to your landowner account to show. Oh gosh, how do I explain it? It really goes to your invoicing number, right? We don't want it comes off the top of that when you. I'm not explaining that very well, but I think you know what I mean. There's not really, it doesn't give you an additional credit.
So Mo, when we get to the transitional pumping value, if you're not using your transitional pumping, you would certainly be able to roll that over as well. So in a wet year, you bring in surface water, your 5-year block of transitional pumping would not, you would still be able to retain the transitional.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe not a direct credit based on the amount of water that you brought in, although I think, as Deanna said, your pumping fees would be less. Did I answer your question, Mo, or are we good?
Yeah, I think you guys did. The ultimate question was, when does the credit retention start? But that's to be determined from the sounds of it.
Yeah, we're right now we're thinking 21, and if someone has a specific case or something that someone wants to discuss, we're happy to have that discussion, on a one-on-one basis. But the plan was to start this program in 21.
Okay, so when you say we're happy to have that discussion, who is we and how do we go about having that discussion? Because we obviously need to have a discussion because we brought in the number off the top of my head. I think my guys have it exactly because we measured it for this very reason because we knew there was going to be a debate later. But I want to say it was like 50 to 100 acre feet of water that we brought in. So it's not earth shattering, but it's a significant amount of water. So we probably need to have that discussion.
Yeah. That person would be Deanna. Let's set up some time to talk with Deanna and let's have that conversation. I think that would be good.
Okay.
Okay. So, Angela Water District. Water District has some mitigation credits that they are working out with other parties. We're leaving that. This is strictly talking from a GSA standpoint. If they're able to work that out, that they are going to report that back to the GSA, and then there may be some credit depending on how and what they report back to the individual landowners within Angela.
I'm sorry, when we're talking about mitigation, just for my own information, what kind of mitigation credits are we talking about here? Is it water use, environmental mitigation?
Angela is looking at bringing in water in other parts, and there's some ongoing discussions about that for some of the surface water that they're bringing in. All of that still needs to be worked out, and we're, you know, that's not on the GSA to work those out. That's on Angela to figure that out between Angela and the sub-basin, and then depending on that conclusion, that will come back to us and in the form of a credit to the to Angela.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Carl, Carl, if you have any issues on that, we can discuss that offline.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I'm just unfamiliar.
We have an agreement with Lower Tule, longstanding, and we pay over 300 grand a year for them to bring in water to offset pumping. That allocation belongs to Angela.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Sorry, Carl, I wasn't trying to be evasive. I'm just, it essentially is an Angela issue, and as far as the GSA is concerned, they need to work that out with the parties involved. Okay, transitional pumping. So if your property was actively irrigated based on 2018 Land IQ crop data, all of this is going to end up in the Four Creeks system. So we're going to look at that. We're basically going to say, okay, these are the lands and parcels that were irrigated in acreage in 2018, and that's what we're going to use moving forward. Again, for any of you that have some concerns or disagreement, or say, hey, look, I either had that I had more land in production at that time frame, bring it to Deanna. Let's have that conversation. We've looked at the Land IQ data from 2018. It's and we've done a few calcs ourselves to see if in some ground truthing. We obviously haven't gone through the entire sub-basin. I'm not saying that, but for the most part, it looks pretty good for what Land IQ has provided us. So
Mayor, in that calculation, was there any correction for the fact that Land IQ is consumptive and Tri-County is facing use off of meters?
So we are strictly using that to say what land was in production. So if the land was in production, it would qualify. And so if any land that's shown as fallow in the Land IQ, if for some reason, if you disagree when we give that information to all the landowners, let us know and we'll have that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, but absolutely. Yeah, we want to make sure that there's a way for you to correct any of that data.
Stacy, just so you know, we're going to use the meter data as backup, but in the data management system and for invoicing, we are going to use Land IQ ET calculations, but they are going to be converted to a pumping number. So we are going to use the Land IQ data for invoicing, but we're going to show it a little differently. We're not going to add the precipitation bucket and do those things. We're going to convert it to a pumped number, and then we will use the meter data as backup and just to keep track of what's happening. So
right. So that's one of the reasons that surface water deliveries are important to us, because we want to make sure that if you bring in surface water, we subtract that out of the equation. We subtract out precipitation out of that equation. You're not having to pay for, and you're not being punished for, rainfall, certainly, and precipitation, and you're not being punished for any surface water. We're going to subtract all of that out. And then the irrigation efficiency coefficients that are put in there are the same ones that Tom Harder used in the groundwater model. So if you're in trees, it's a certain value. If you're in row crops, it's a different value.
Thank you.
Okay, so Land IQ data, the tier 1 will be allocated in 5-year blocks. You can transfer your transitional pumping between landowners who are in the transitional pumping, who qualify for transitional pumping. So if I had active land in 2018 and Deanna has active land in 2018, I can transfer my transitional pumping value or some portion of it to Deanna. But it only applies to the 5-year block. That transitional pumping does not carry into the next 5-year block. There is on the bottom of the slide here, you'll see that there is the values for the next 20 years. Between 21 and 25, we're looking at 12 acre feet per acre total. Okay, so not 12 acre feet a year, obviously, but in total per acre. And then we start to ramp that down a little bit. This is transitional pumping over that time. So if it gives you some flexibility, if there's a wet year, you don't use all your transitional pumping, you can carry that to the next year within the 5-year block. You bring in some surface water, you bring in something else, you opt to fallow land 1 year. If you're a row crop, your transitional pumping is still there and available, or you can transfer it to someone else. There is, however, since this is all overdraft, there is a tier 1 penalty, and that is $125 per acre foot. And again, that 125 only applies to your transitional pumping. It does not affect your sustainable yield or any other credit. If you have credits, if I transfer credits to my sustainable yield credits to Deanna, she's not, that 125 does not apply to the sustainable yield that I've transferred to her.
Out of curiosity, actually, thinking about that scenario, so if landowners are going to be transferring, is the GSA thinking they'll just bill the landowner for their allocation, and then, it's up to the two landowners doing the transfer to true up outside of that? Or have you sort of made consideration for who pays that penalty if a transitional pumping is transferred between landowners?
Oh.
Yeah, currently, Carl, the way it's set up is whoever is doing the irrigation and that evapotranspiration transpiration comes off, that's who would be invoiced for that water.
Okay, well,
yeah.
So one complication of that just sort of comes to mind. So if there's a sort of a cap of, say, 3 feet or 3.5 feet for any given year, and Mo transfers this transitional pumping credit to me, and I pump 4 feet, it's above sort of that sort of specified limit, but it's because of a transfer, not because of over pumping of allocated yield. So that I don't know. There's probably some things to think about there, and just making sure there's not confusion later on once we're
right.
Yeah, you're right about that, and it will have to go into, it'll have to be noted in a way that that doesn't cause you to trigger that overage limit.
Right.
And we'll just think through that and make sure that's worked through in the data management system properly.
Yeah, Carl, that's a very good point, because you're right. If you're within your tier 1 allocation for the year, and then someone else has transferred a couple acre feet to you, we don't want to charge you at tier 2 for that couple acre feet. We want to keep it at tier 1.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So the nice thing is we're still working with Four Creeks on all the rules for the data management system. So it's nice that you guys bring up things like this, that we can incorporate those rules into the DMS. Questions? Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and move on. as we mentioned, the annual cap is 3.4 acre feet per acre. And again, we may have to take into consideration what Carl just talked about. But then as you exceed that cap, then you get into the tier 2 penalty rate. And if you exceed the 5-year allocation, then that's going to be debted against your next 5-year allocation. So for example, if you exceed the 12 acre feet in 25, then let's say you exceed it by a couple acre feet, just for sake of discussion, then your allocation for 2630 becomes 5.5, obviously. So that's what we're trying to do in a way to give you some flexibility and certainly take into account that, you know, there's a wet and dry cycle. And if a wet or dry cycle hits in that, you know, as we're going that 5-year allocation, there's a little bit of ability to work around that.
Is that exceedance a 1-to-1 or is it greater than 1-to-1? So if you overuse 1 acre foot, are you taking away 1 acre foot, or are you taking away something more or less from the next year or next?
Right now we're thinking, Deanna, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're thinking 1-to-1.
1-to-1, yeah.
Yeah. We want to be as fair as we can and not punitive. Okay.
Thought on this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just so I understand the sort of disincentivizing fee, and that makes sense. But it would seem to me if we're billing for overuse and we're debiting for the next 5-year allocation, then there ought to be flexibility on either side of that where you can also roll it over. Otherwise, I think if we're not rolling over, then, you know, the billing makes sense, but then to debit against that next 5 years, if you don't have the opportunity to roll over, it is probably not sort of meeting that fair goal that you were talking about. So I suggest considering axing the debit against the next 5-year allocation if you're going to have, you know, $750 per acre foot tax for overage.
Yeah, you know, Carl, that's a good point. And I want to be careful that, you know, I want to be careful that we don't write something that inadvertently gets something too far out of whack. So we might want to think about that one. You know, let us put our heads together on that one a little bit. I certainly understand what you're saying. It feels like you're being punished twice, right? You're paying the old,
Yeah.
and you're paying, and then you're getting less the next 5-year allocation.
Especially given the sort of the magnitude of that overuse fee, it just seems out there. So no arguments against the tier 2 fee, but if you're going to have a double whammy, there's got to be a carrot to go along with that stick, I think, or just keep it simple and pull it out.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, that's.
Guys, time out for a minute. We'll talk about some of that, but that 750 is a very low number in the valley, so we're being very conservative on that. 500 was out of the question. You could just market water for that. So there's guys right now selling water for $1,000 right now. So 750 is very low. We'll talk about the rolling evergreen transitional stuff in another separate meeting, but that's an important point on how you carry over specific points of what the total water allocation is after a 5-year cut and dry window. There are some things that may need to be carried over. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Mark, my comment was not so much to the 750, it was just to the fact of if you overuse for sort of your 5-year block, that you're paying the penalty plus deducting from the next tier. And I think that makes sense. My comment was that kind of makes sense if you're allowing a rollover, but if you're not allowing a rollover, it's more of just a double penalty. So I was suggesting probably to keep it simple, removing the deduction from the next block if you're already having a penalty fee.
Good point, Carl.
Carl.
Yeah, that is a good point. Okay, well, this was, as we talked about, as Carl pointed out, there's the penalty for the tier 2 is at 750, and I believe this is my last slide. A couple of things that I didn't necessarily put on the slides, but that are on the handout that Deanna sent. The penalty fees are going to be charged on a quarterly basis. So we are getting monthly data now from Land IQ, and as we get we're feeling more and more comfortable as time has gone by. Their first data set was in May, and they've submitted a few more since then. We were starting to feel a little bit more comfortable that those numbers are starting to likely match up with the other, some of the metering data that we have seen. As time has gone by, I think that's getting closer and closer. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is it says on the bottom of the sheet is that the penalty money that is collected, the idea there is that money would be held in an account for projects. And that, we're going to try and look at projects to bring in water or ways to mitigate if there's, if there's some type of mitigation necessary for, in reduction of pumping. So there's the idea here is I know you're going to be paying a lot of money over the next few years, and we want to make sure that money is used for the benefit of everyone in the GSA. And then the other item, that Deanna has highlighted here that I should mention is that the transfers and the water block allocations are only available to accounts in good standing with Tri-County. So the key there is making sure that everybody is paying their fees as required, so that we can keep everybody moving forward. But we have to have a little bit of a, as we said, a carrot and a stick, and that's a good example of making sure that everybody pays their bills on this, and providing any of the required information that we might need.
But it'd be nice to Deanna.
Yeah, it'd be nice to Deanna.
Oh,
A little more serious note, I would just strongly suggest probably when the policy gets sort of finalized and it goes out to the board for a vote, I think it's a good idea to have, excuse me, language in that policy that talks about how these fees are going to, be held in account for projects or earmarked for that. I think it brings a lot more validity to that. I mean, not just for sort of operational purposes for the GSA, but then also for DWR, protecting the GSA from litigation, whatever. Probably just a good idea to have that in there.
I agree, Carl, and I haven't sent a lot of this. This will go through legal counsel. We're trying to do as much on the ground before we engage the attorneys, but there will be, a more formal policy, and it will lay that out much more clearly and have the proper language in there so that it's much more specific than the general ideas that we're laying out today. That said, the general policy I don't think is going to change much. So your bottom line numbers are not going to change much. I definitely hear you on the rollover. I think that's something that can still be discussed. But I think this kind of gives you an idea of where we're headed, and I don't see that direction changing. So, but policy language, more formal documents will definitely be what the board will consider.
Yeah.
Deanna, when you talk about the legal review, I'm assuming that'll happen before this goes before the board?
Yeah, and again, you know, we're going to work on an ordinance in 2021, and that'll really set things more formally. But whatever the board, whatever goes out in the board packet, will be much more specific than these cheat sheets that I sent out to the stakeholders. So. I do expect, just so everybody knows, I do expect the board will consider this allocation policy, though, at their January meeting.
Sorry, another question from me. When they consider the allocation policy, will they also approve and consider the use monitoring? Because I know previously with the passage of the metering policy and other policies, it's been more focused on that being the use monitoring. So I think it's important to have the board look at it, or at least make it clear that use monitoring will be done using ET from Land IQ with some calculation to make it convertible.
Yeah, and you know, I want to say that the board has, I know, and there's been documents that have gone out that have said either or. They are going to use either or. But that's a good point, and we'll make that more specific because that will be what we're basing the invoicing off of. It'll be in there.
Okay, yeah, just something to pay attention to in kind of communicating it. And on that note, is it Geosyntec running those numbers, or will they be internal?
No. Those numbers that calculation will be built into the DMS system that Four Creeks is going to do.
Okay. Thank you.
And, you know, we might compare it, Stacy, with the metering data that we get, but the idea is to have that system do all of the work.
Thank you.
And we'll you know, one of the things we'll do is review the calculation of how that is set up and all of that information. So everything will be transparent.
Yeah, and I think most people on this call are familiar, but my background is actually in engineering, and I spent a lot of time at Cal Poly working on this stuff. So that taking an ET calculation to a meter assumption is more theoretical than actual. So it'll be very interesting to see how Four Creeks works that.
Yeah. Okay. Other comments, concerns, questions that we should?
I have another question on the transitional versus sustainable yield credits that are going to be allowed. Have we finalized the number for the transitional, and the sustainable yield is at the 0.44 number?
Yeah. So on the transitional, it'll be in the 5-year blocks. Do you want me to put that back on the screen, or?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get the detail out of that. So, you know, if it's in the 5-year block, how much of that 12.5 in that first 5-year block is transitional?
The 12 acre feet is the transitional.
Right.
So theoretically, you would have 0.44 acre feet per acre per year on top of that 12 acre feet.
Yes, that's correct.
Correct.
Yeah, so the 12 acre feet that you see there is all transitional.
Okay. And then going back to the debate that we were having at the last meeting regarding who gets transitional and who doesn't get transitional, you guys were going to go back and have some conversation. So I'm curious to see where we are with that conversation. Since we followed the ground and we have not been irrigating it, and we planned for Sigma coming around the horizon, and followed 1,400 acres. And I know Angiola's, followed thousands of acres and has not been irrigating them. So do we get transitional, or do we not get transitional?
only the actively irrigated acres based on the Land IQ 2018 are going to get transitional. And that includes all the Angela fallowed, and that, you know, even at this, you know, we have sustainability goals we have to meet, and it's going to be difficult, and the board may have to take additional actions at 5-year updates if we're not meeting those goals. So I think it's going to also be very interesting to see what the department comes back with on our plans. And, yeah, it kind of blows with the wind over there with the department. A couple of months ago, I would have said that they were very much, I thought that they were really going to be maybe easier on us. But this last meeting I had with them, I will tell you, the mood has changed again, and it was not a positive room as far as our plans. It was an actual, there are going to be people talking to the state right out of the gate. So that's a different attitude just from a couple months ago, and I don't know why that was the attitude at this last meeting, but you know, I think what I'm trying to say with that, I think a lot of management actions will be guided by what the department comes back with on our plans here at the end of next year. And so, you know, I think it's important to put these policies in place because that was one of their biggest pushes was you're going to have to prove what you've implemented. We want to see it, what you have implemented. And we will consider that. But just saying you're going to implement something will not make the grade, is what we were told. So what happens here at the end of next year is really going to guide what happens in the future. And I'm hopeful that by implementing and by working towards some of these projects, it'll be enough to keep the department out of our backyard, so to speak.
Well, I appreciate all of that. I truly do, but I still don't understand, as I was trying to state at the last meeting, how us being proactive and being responsible should get us penalized versus the guys that planted last year are going to be, in essence, given a transitional credit of water that we don't get for being responsible. So in essence, we're being penalized, even though that's not the term that's being used. So I go back to that same debate. Well,
every acre that's fallow gives us that much more sustainability in Tri-County Water Authority. I mean, that's the best answer. But no, and I have. You're not the only grower that has fallowed land, but when we went to discussing how much we could actually continue pumping, our overdraft is large enough that, you know, somewhere there had to be a line, right? So this is the line.
Well, I guess ultimately my beef is, why don't the guys that planted have to share in that line or in that pain and reduction?
Well, if they planted in 2020, it's not going to be very helpful to them either when we're looking at 2018 Land IQ crop data, right?
Right.
Okay, so they planted in 18. Those guys that planted in 18 too. Like
somewhere you have to have the line, Mo. That's all I can say to that. You know, if you're in a year, you know, of 2018, then maybe we can have that discussion. But if you're going to talk about land that was in production 8, 9, 10 years ago, I don't think the board's going to have that discussion.
Okay. All right, I guess we'll have that debate at a later date.
All right. Other comments, questions, concerns, modifications?
Yeah, this is Jeff. I got that last conversation, I guess, raised a question in my mind. Is there, I'm assuming that these transition pumping amounts tie back to a total number of transitional pumping that that the plan allows you to do. And so you've done a calculation, you're going to make, I think we're probably backed into this, right? How much overdraft is there? And we're going to eliminate a certain percentage of this overdraft over this 20-year period. And when you kind of do the math, that means you got so much transitional pumping available in the first 5-year block, second 5-year block, et cetera. And then you allocate that out to the eligible acres, and that's how you came up with these numbers. Is that a fair understanding of how you came up with these amounts?
So some of that certainly was done. We certainly did look at that, but the glide path, if you will, Sigma basically says, hey, you got to achieve sustainability by 2040. We also took into account the fact that that we can't be too draconian, right away. We've got to allow people time to adjust and transition, and so there was some consideration taken into account to make that glide path as what's the right word, as reasonable as possible, to allow the growers to have some flexibility. But the idea at the end is to still achieve sustainability by 2040. And you can see that by 2040, the transitional pumping, is essentially is completed by 2040, and that you're into the sustainable yield at that point. Now, the key here, of course, is going to be to implement projects and look at
Yeah, no, I get that. That's not my question.
okay,
Because
sorry.
I'm just looking at this. I'm hearing Mo talk about, I think I think there's a point there to what he's making, but what I'm trying to understand is there some flexibility in this? And you got 12 acre feet allocated out for that 5-year block over a finite number of acres. And what I'm hearing Mo say is, hey, I got acres that aren't going to be in that finite deal. Now, you can approach this 2 different ways. Looks to me like you're giving a pretty generous amount to the acres that qualify. I mean, let's say Pixley, Lower Tule, they're at 10, you're at 12. So, that's 20% more transition water that's available in Tri-County than would be in your neighbors.
Right.
But you allow for it to get transferred amongst the participants, and business-wise, at $125 an acre foot, I got to assume everybody who's qualified, every acre that's qualified to receive that is going to make sure they get all the way to 12. I mean, why wouldn't you? If you could, you sell it to somebody else. See, because the next available water is a lot more expensive than that 125. So, I don't, that's an approach that you're taking. It's possible to wheel that number down a little bit and leave a little bit of extra water available that the board could, on a case by case, allocate out. And, you could do that. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but it comes, you got this block of water, how are you going to allocate it? And that's the most fair to the most people. So I'm just, raising that because you got some flexibility. If you don't want to go there, you don't have to. And at some point, you got to make a decision, and these are the rules, and then everybody's going to figure out how to make those rules work for them. Right. And I completely understand that. But that's the basis of just kind of this little bit of a interaction with you. Is the flexibility that you do that.
Yeah. So Jeff, we essentially looked at how much pumping occurred in the last 5 years, and we wanted to make sure that we were at a value that we could start to transition from down to the sustainable yield value. And so, we looked at that. It's not a straight line. It is, like I said, it's a bit more of a softer glide path. The second part, though, the direction that we got from the board was that, the board was okay with the irrigated land, the land in production, receiving only those lands receiving the transitional pumping. And then, as Deanna explained, we went through a number of iterations on what that cutoff would be, and ultimately decided that decision should be the 2018 data set, and that we felt more comfortable about.
The irrigated lands as well was not just from the board. That was a push from the stakeholders as well. So, I mean, this was with stakeholder consideration that we ended up with the irrigated lands. And if we were to give a larger allocations to the fallow lands, considering the number of fallow lands that Angela has alone and Sandridge Partners, the overall allocation for the irrigated lands would drop dramatically.
Yeah.
Jeff, the real number should be 10 feet. We've actually softened it for these first 5 years to allow our growers to transition a little bit after having a number of talks with different growers. So we're taking a shot. We'll see what happens after 2025 when we get our first real numbers to review. But that's about as lenient as you can be. Exactly what you said, though, Jeff, backing into the numbers based on historical use and all the hydrological information that we have scientifically, we're on the ragged edge of being too much. So we're doing this for 5 years, and hopefully we haven't removed so much from the bucket that it's going to be really hard to replace going forward after 2025. But we're doing this to get everybody on board and to transition as softly as we can going into 2025.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I guess, would you agree with me, though, that just the business decision is if this transition water is fully transferable, that everybody's gonna use all of it? Either they'll use it or they'll transfer it. I mean, and I guess that's the question. Not every GSA has taken that approach that you could transfer transition water.
Aren't we keeping transfer though in the GSA?
Yeah.
The transfer is in the GSA, so I don't have any problem with the transfer.
Right.
No, but it's a matter of using it all. You'll use it all as long as it's fully transferable, and the price is you will use it all.
Right.
You're right. And that said, it should. Between the irrigated lands, that should give our landowners a little bit of flexibility to rework their operations to make it work. And over time, that water does disappear. This was really to offer as much flexibility and as much water up front as we could to start this transition.
So Jeff, you're 100% right. And we don't have a water market per se set up in Tri-County, or much less the Tule Subbasin, although the plan is to apply for some grant money to be able to do that. And you mentioned the 125, but yes, you're absolutely right. What the decision between two private parties to transfer that's up to you guys. Whatever agreement you have, as long as the GSA is made aware of the volume that is transferred, so we can make sure it's credited on the correct account. We'll leave that up to everyone else to kind of decide how you want to do that. I think Mark said it, and this is important. I think the 12 acre feet definitely was on the generous side to allow for some transition for all of the growers, that we have, and everyone that's working in the area. And so trying to give our landowners as much flexibility as we can.
Well, I guess, you know, that I completely understand that it's a completely local decision and, you know, you
Yeah.
guys, you know, you've done a real good job of putting this all together. The practical implication of allowing it to be fully transferred is it'll all get used.
Yes.
If you didn't allow it to be transferred or you put some kind of a drag on it, that
Yeah.
you could transfer it and it's going to be a pretty good profit center, right? I mean, if depending on what, you know, what kind of years we have, but I mean that you could see that this transition water, the Tri-County will get the 125 and, you know, the market price could be, you know, $500.
Right.
You know,
Whatever it
so-
is. Right.
But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that you'd be a fool to have access to that at 125 and the ability to sell it for market price and not use it.
Yeah.
So there are other policies that you could put in that would make that at least a little bit less, but you know, it's your decision and
Yeah.
you know, you understand that. So I'm just raising it because I noticed.
No, everything you said is 100% correct. Yeah. Ultimately, the decision was made. I mean, you can see from 12 to 7.5. That's a pretty steep drop in that, you know, in that second allotment. And then, you know, everyone knows that, and going into this, and they're going to have to make some important business decisions.
Jeff, the other thing that's important to note, and for Mo and Carl too, is that even the tier 2 number, that's just based on our estimate. We'll have to review that
Right.
with the market, what's going on, because if it's becoming a sale type of deal, we're going to have to adjust those numbers.
Yeah. You know, I always feel like we end these conversations, you know, we're talking about allocation and I always feel like we end these conversations on that note, but I almost should reverse the order I talk about these things in the agenda. But projects, if there are projects that need to be considered, maybe they're not, you know, maybe it's not surface water, maybe there's some irrigation efficiencies, or there's other types of projects that we can go out and try to find money. You know, when you're talking to people like me, I'm always thinking, well, we're going to find, you know, we're going to build basins, we're going to recharge, we're going to store water, we're going to do this. But from a grower standpoint, a lot of times there's a lot of other monies available, you know, for irrigation efficiencies and other types of items that you may want to implement. So think about all of that. And if there are projects that you think that we should consider, please, let's get that information to us. And we can try and figure out ways to make that work within our credit system. I think I've officially killed this conversation, Deanna.
I'm sure everybody noted on what I sent out as well that we don't intend to begin charging the tier 1 and tier 2 penalty rates until 2022. So this first year will be, you know, really working with the data management system and making sure that our calculations are working for everybody and working through any of those bugs before we set into those penalty rates. So, and those will be set forth again in the ordinance that we work on. So that gives an extra year there. And we'll still have the $10 per acre foot charge on the pumping, but those penalty rates won't start till 2022. Is that a positive note to end on?
I think so, but it depends on these guys. Questions, other concerns, comments?
Well, just a comment, and then I'll have to be rude and jump off for another meeting. But I know that we've all talked about this quite a bit, and it's just not fun. So I I do notice that there was a pretty fair consideration of a lot of the comments, at least, or the majority of the comments from last time. And this is definitely a document that looks more friendly to sort of the success of, being able to keep farming in the sub-basin and then hopefully start working on implementing projects, which is, I think, where the real focus of this GSA needs to move to now, is getting water in so that this doesn't hurt so much. So thanks for the consideration, and sorry that I got to jump.
Take care, Carl.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Carl.
Hey, Deanna, when's the $10 acre foot pumping charge start?
Last year or this year, 2020? It won't, next year's will be exactly as this year, but it will be invoiced hopefully, fingers crossed, through the data management system. So we should be up and running before the end of the first quarter.
Okay.
And just because I know I'm going to get this question, this year's invoices are based off of meter readings submitted to the GSA, or are they based also off of the Land IQ conversion?
So 2020s were actually based off cropping information, and Provost and Pritchard did an estimate through that. 2021 will be off of the Land IQ data.
Thank you. I just know I'm going to get asked.
Yeah. Sure. That's a
we
fair question.
have gone back and forth on that quite a bit, but and we're really trying to find the best and most specific way to get to those numbers. And it looks to be Land IQ's really developed a product that, when we look at the numbers, they're in the realm that it makes it more sense to utilize what they're giving us. So, and Amir will be coming out with some of those numbers. We're working on those. Everything kind of got pushed to the back burner a little bit because of this Prop 68 grant and the short time frame. So there's a lot of stuff that we were working really hard to have here at the end of the year. But again, that Prop 68 kind of threw us off our time frame a little bit. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a common theme in every GSA I monitor, so you're not alone.
Good to know.
Yeah, I don't know if Stacey, if you heard me whining earlier about the holidays and the fact that I made those commitments to doing that Prop 68 stuff. So yeah. Okay. If there aren't any other comments, let me talk about the next board meeting is on January 14th. So between next month or so, obviously we have the holidays coming up, but I would encourage you to continue to reach out to Deanna, and if you have concerns, and if you still would like to see some other modifications made to this document before we start to finalize it and put it in front of the board for approval. And then our next meeting of this committee is on January 27th. So we'll be getting back to more of our end of the month, last Wednesday of the month, timeline for the 21 as we get through the holidays here. And so, if you, like I said, if you have comments, please get them to Deanna. We can certainly take a look at them, have that discussion. And if not, then I think, Deanna, we can call this a shorter meeting and give everybody an extra half hour for back into their day.
Well, technically we put till 11:30, so we're 5 minutes over.
Oh, well, then I owe you everybody 2 minutes. Well, let me ask again, if there are any comments or any last minute, anything else that you would like to touch on or want to, I know we kind of went through the allocation, but is there anything else as a group? I am still, wide open to this group helping determine the focus of this committee. The allocation has been a big part of what we've talked about since March. But as we wrap this up and we start to implement, I would like us to start to talk about some of the other priorities that this group thinks that the GSA should focus in on past the allocation. Carl mentioned projects, and I'd like to have more discussions on that and get into more specifics. But there's other parts, there's the coordination and with the remainder of the sub-basin, there's the, there's the issue of how updates to the plan, things of that nature. I think updating the plan is going to be a big process, and there's lots of things that we've talked about over the last few months that we probably would like to address in the 5-year update, of which 1 year is gone. Just want to point that out. And so, things like that. So start to think about what you would like to see this group focus in on and the priorities for implementation. And we want to make sure that the GSA is responsive to your, to your needs and requests. And that's it, Deanna. That's all I've got. Otherwise, I'm just going to wish everybody a happy holidays and wrap it up.
Yep. Thank you.
Merry Christmas,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
And,
Have a great Christmas and New Year's.
Merry Christmas
Yep.
all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.